The call came at 6:47 on a Sunday morning. I heard it from the other side of the bedroom, that specific vibration against the nightstand that cuts through sleep like a blade. My eyes found the ceiling before my brain found a single coherent thought, and then I reached over, turned the phone face up, and saw his name. Craig. I stared at it long enough for the screen to go dark again. I knew what it was about. I knew what he wanted. And I knew, with the kind of certainty that settles in your chest when you have been preparing for a moment for months, that whatever he was about to ask me, my answer was going to be no. He called again. I watched the phone light up a second time, watched his name sit there like a challenge. He called a third time. By the fourth call, I picked up, not because I was afraid and not because I planned to say yes. I picked up because I had learned a long time ago that avoiding Craig Holloway was a short-term relief that always cost more in the long run than just dealing with him directly. Gemma, his voice was already clipped, already laced with that particular brand of irritation he wore like a second skin. I need you in the office. The Paxton migration needs to go live today. I moved the timeline up. Craig, I said, as evenly as I could manage at that hour on a Sunday, today is my day off. And I don't have active insurance coverage for on-site work on weekends unless it goes through emergency authorization protocol first. We've discussed this. It's in writing. The silence that followed had a texture to it, the kind that forms when someone is deciding exactly how much authority they are willing to weaponize in a single moment. I'm not asking you, Gemma, he said slowly. I'm telling you. And I said just as slowly, just as clearly, then I'm telling you I won't be coming in. I genuinely did not expect what came next. Not from someone who still needed me as badly as Craig did. Not from someone who had spent 4 years in a building full of work he didn't understand and people he had never bothered to. You're fired, he said. Effective immediately. Clear your desk by Monday morning. You are done. And he hung up. I sat in that quiet bedroom with the phone in my hand and the morning light just beginning to push through the curtains. And a single thought moved through me, slow and steady, and as inevitable as a tide coming in. He has absolutely no idea what he just did. Before we go any further, if this story already has you leaning forward, this channel is exactly where you belong. Every day, we bring you stories about people who stood their ground when it would have been so much easier to fold. We are on the road to 5,000 subscribers, and every single one of you is what makes this possible. Hit subscribe. It takes 1 second. Now, let's get back to Gemma. My name is Gemma Calloway. At the time this story begins, I was 34 years old, and I held the position of Lead Infrastructure Systems Analyst at a mid-sized logistics technology firm called Ardent Solutions, based out of Columbus, Ohio. I want to tell you a little about where I came from, because it matters, more than you might think, to every decision I made when things finally came to a head. I grew up in a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where the names on the water tower and the names on the high school football jerseys are the same names that have been there for 3 generations. My father spent 30 years managing a grain cooperative. My mother was an office administrator at the county health clinic for just as long. They weren't wealthy, but they were not people who were diminished by that. What they gave me was not money. It was a thorough and unshakable understanding of what it means to do your work with integrity and what it feels like when someone treats you as less than you are. I got a full scholarship to Ohio State, graduated with a degree in computer information systems, spent the next decade building a career in IT infrastructure, the kind of work that most people don't notice until something breaks. I was good at it, better than good. I had certifications that most people take 3 attempts to pass. I had a natural instinct for the architecture of complex systems, the ability to look at an entire network the way some people read a room, instinctively and completely, in a single scan. I joined Ardent Solutions 4 years before Craig Holloway fired me on a Sunday morning. And in those 4 years, I had done things for that company that no job description had ever formally asked of me. I designed the entire backend migration framework that moved them off a crumbling legacy server infrastructure that was genuinely 1 bad quarter away from catastrophic failure. I built the network redundancy protocols that kept operations running during 2 separate regional outages that would have cost the company millions. I trained a team of 5 junior analysts, every single one of whom had gone on to get promoted. I had watched that building run smoother year after year because of systems I built quietly and maintained without applause. I was not a woman who was easy to replace. Craig Holloway had simply never accepted that. To understand why that Sunday morning phone call was the final straw rather than just another difficult moment, you have to understand the 18 months that had led up to it. Craig Holloway had been brought in as Director of Technology Operations roughly a year and a half before all of this happened. He came from a consulting background, the kind of career built entirely on presentations, projections, and the ability to walk into any room and sound more confident than the situation warranted. He was polished. He was smooth in meetings. He was exactly the kind of person who impresses executives during quarterly reviews and quietly terrifies the people who actually do the technical work. From the week Craig arrived, I could feel the shift in the air. He started small, the way people like him always do when they're establishing territory, reassigning projects without explanation, moving goalposts on deadlines after the work was already finished, taking credit in leadership meetings for initiatives that had been in motion long before he showed up and signed his offer letter. I watched it happen to my colleagues first. To Hallie, who had spent 6 years managing client system integrations, and who suddenly found her reports being rerouted through Craig without her knowledge or consent. To Felix, one of the sharpest engineers on my infrastructure team, who was methodical and brilliant, and who Craig consistently dismissed in meetings as overly technical. As though that were an insult at an engineering firm. I watched it, I documented it. I held my ground the way I had been raised to, professionally, quietly, and with meticulous records. Every email, I kept a copy with a timestamp. Every verbal directive that contradicted something we had previously agreed to in writing, I followed up with a written summary sent directly to Craig with a read receipt enabled. It wasn't paranoia. It was self-preservation built on experience. The kind of institutional caution you develop when you have spent years watching people like Craig turn other people's competence into their own cover story. The Sunday work protocol had been formally established 6 months before the firing. Ardent Solutions maintained a weekend on-call rotation for emergency technical support. The rotation was structured, compensated, and covered by specific liability protocols that protected both employees and the company. If you were on the rotation, you were covered. If you weren't expected to come in for anything short of a genuine, pre-authorized emergency. The process existed. The paperwork existed. Craig had been briefed on it multiple times. I was not on the weekend rotation that March. I hadn't been for 2 months because my mother had been dealing with a health situation that required me to be reachable and available on weekends. I had disclosed this to human resources in writing. I had worked directly with Nora, our HR manager, to temporarily adjust my rotation status. Every form was signed. Every acknowledgement was documented. Nora was one of the most thorough and professional people in that building, and she had handled the accommodation without a single drop detail. Craig had been copied on the original notification. He knew. The Paxton account migration had been scheduled for 11 weeks. I had built the entire rollout plan myself. The staging environment, the go-live sequence, the rollback protocol in case anything went sideways. I had flagged, in writing, twice, that the aggressive timeline Craig kept pushing forward was going to create pressure points that were difficult to manage safely without proper preparation windows. I had formally recommended a Sunday go-live 3 weeks out, with full coverage authorized, proper insurance documentation filed, and 2 backup technicians confirmed on standby. Craig had ignored every recommendation. He moved the go-live to that Sunday, 4 days before it was scheduled, without consulting me, without filing the emergency work authorization, and without ensuring anyone on my team had the proper weekend liability coverage active. And then he called me at 6:47 in the morning, told me to come in anyway, and when I said no, he fired me. By 8 a.m. that Sunday, I had 3 missed calls from Craig, one from a number I didn't recognize, and a voicemail from Craig that I will not repeat in its entirety, but which included the phrase, and I am quoting exactly, "You have always been a problem in this department," and which concluded with a clear statement that my employment was terminated, effective immediately. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and thought, not emotionally, not frantically. I thought the way I always thought through a complex infrastructure problem, from the outer edge inward, mapping the failure points, identifying what was load-bearing and what was not, figuring out exactly where the structure was going to collapse without the right support in place. And here is what Craig Holloway did not know. He did not know that I was the sole administrator with active credentials for the Paxton migration environment. He did not know that the backup access protocols he had never taken the time to understand required a mandatory 72-hour reactivation window that could not be bypassed without voiding the client's data integrity warranty. He did not know that the entire infrastructure architecture I had built for that migration, every staging layer, every rollout script, every failsafe checkpoint, every integration node, was designed in a way that required someone with my specific level of access and my specific institutional knowledge of the system to execute safely. He did not know any of this because he had never asked. He had been too busy being the director of technology operations to learn what it was, exactly, that he was directing. I did not sabotage anything. I need to say that clearly because it matters to me that it is understood. I did not delete files. I did not change a single password out of spite. I did not touch one line of code that morning. What I did was nothing. I made a second cup of coffee. I called my mother. I sat in my backyard for an hour and watched the neighborhood come to life. I existed, peacefully, legitimately, fully, on my day off. At 8:15 a.m., I forwarded Craig's termination voicemail to him via email with a read receipt requested, and copied Nora on the thread. The system didn't fail because I did something. It failed because Craig moved forward without me and discovered, slowly and then suddenly and then catastrophically, that he had no idea how to proceed. By noon, Felix called me. He was whispering, the kind of whisper that means the office is too quiet and the air pressure is all wrong. "Gemma," he said, "it's bad. Craig brought in 2 outside contractors this morning to push the migration live without you. They got into the staging environment, but they cannot authenticate to the production layer. It's throwing error codes that nobody here has ever seen before. Craig is..." Felix paused for a second. "He's not handling it." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "Are you coming in?" "Felix," I said, "I don't work there anymore. Craig told me I was fired this morning. You can check your email." I forwarded the voicemail to him with a copy to Nora at 8:15. The pause that followed was long enough that I could hear the faint hum of the office behind him. He fired you," Felix said slowly. "Today, this morning?" "On a Sunday," I said, "before 7 a.m. Another pause. "Gemma," Felix said quietly, "he has no idea what he's done." "I know," I said. "I'll talk to you soon." By 2 p.m., my phone was ringing with the particular pattern of institutional panic, rapid, overlapping, increasingly urgent. Felix again. A number I didn't recognize that turned out to be one of the contractors Craig had brought in, who had somehow gotten my cell number from the internal directory and wanted to ask me a quick technical question. I let that one go to voicemail. Then Felix called back and his voice had changed. Lower. Faster. The 2 contractors Craig had brought in had attempted a forced authentication override on the production environment. They had tried to brute force their way past the access wall I had designed. And what they had done, what their unauthorized override attempt had done, was trigger the cascading security lockout protocol I had built into the system 14 months ago as a safeguard against exactly this kind of reckless, unauthorized access attempt. The Paxton production environment was now locked. Not corrupted, not destroyed, completely locked. Every server, every access point, every integration pipeline. All of it behind a multi-layer authentication wall that, per the security architecture I had designed and documented, required the lead infrastructure analyst to disengage manually with physical credentials after a formal review window. Craig Holloway had fired the only person who could open it. The next call came from Ardent's main office number. I let it go to voicemail. Craig's voice in the message was a different instrument entirely from the one that had fired me 6 hours earlier. Measured, careful, stripped of its earlier authority and replaced with something that sounded a great deal like a man standing at the edge of a very large professional cliff. "Gemma, this is Craig. I think there may have been a miscommunication this morning. I'd like to connect when you have a moment at your convenience. Please call me back. I did not call back. At 3:40 p.m., Nora called. I answered for Nora because Nora had always been straight with me, and because I suspected she already knew most of what had happened and was calling to tell me where things stood. Gemma, she said. She sounded tired in the way that HR professionals sound when they are cleaning up a mess that could have been avoided entirely. I received your email this morning. I want you to know I've already begun a formal review of the termination. Based on the contract provisions, your rotation adjustment documentation, and the insurance authorization records on file, this situation is not clean for the company. I know, I said. Craig is asking HR to reverse the termination verbally. I've told him it doesn't work that way. A brief pause. The Paxton client has been notified of a delay. Their leadership team is not happy. Craig told them it was a technical issue unrelated to staffing. Of course he did, I said. Gemma, Nora said carefully, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to be straight with me. Is there anything on the infrastructure side that requires urgent attention before this gets worse? Nora, I said, equally carefully, I am a private citizen on a Sunday afternoon. The infrastructure I built during my employment at Ardent Solutions belongs to Ardent Solutions. And Ardent Solutions has a director of technology operations who is fully empowered to manage it. A pause. Understood, she said. I'll be in touch. Monday morning came quietly. Important mornings often do. They don't announce themselves, they simply arrive, and you either have what you need or you don't. I had what I needed. Sunday evening, I had contacted an employment attorney named Adrian Walsh, who had been referred to me 3 years earlier by a colleague who had gone through something similar. I had never needed to call her, but I had kept her number. I had sent Adrian everything. The contract, the rotation adjustment approval with Nora's signature, the insurance authorization records, Craig's termination voicemail, my written timeline recommendations for the Paxton migration, the full email chain showing Craig's repeated disregard of those recommendations, and the read receipt confirming he had seen my Monday notification within minutes of it being sent. Adrian called me back at 9 p.m. Sunday. Gemma, she said, and even through the phone I could hear the particular quality of a lawyer who has been handed exactly what they needed. This is not a complicated case. This is a gift. I arrived at Ardent Solutions at 8:30 Monday morning, not to clear my desk. I arrived because Nora had called me early that morning and asked me to come in for a formal conversation. When I asked if I should bring representation, she said that was entirely my right. I brought Adrian. The fourth-floor conference room held 4 people when we walked in. Nora, Craig, and 2 faces I hadn't seen in that particular combination before. Lawrence Whitfield, Ardent's chief operating officer, a man I had spoken to perhaps 4 times in 4 years, always briefly and always in group settings, and a man named Garrett from the company's internal legal team, who had the particular expression of someone who had spent the last 18 hours reviewing documents he wished he'd never had to read. Craig looked like he had not slept. That is not a figure of speech. His eyes were red at the edges, and his collar was ever so slightly crooked. The kind of detail that only surfaces when someone has dressed in a hurry, or in the particular fog that descends on a person who has spent 12 straight hours staring at a locked server that will not open, and a phone that the only person who can fix it has stopped answering. Lawrence Whitfield looked at me across that conference table with an expression I could not entirely read, and he said, "Miss Calloway, thank you for coming in." "Of course," I said. Craig began to speak. Lawrence raised one hand, a small, quiet gesture, and Craig stopped. "I've reviewed the situation extensively since yesterday afternoon," Lawrence said. "I want to be direct with you. What happened on Sunday, both the request that was made and the manner in which your employment was terminated, was not consistent with this company's policies, its contractual obligations, or its obligations to you as an employee." He looked at Craig when he said it. Craig looked at the table. "The Paxton client is currently in delay on a migration that represents a significant contract for this company," Lawrence continued. "I understand you designed and built the infrastructure supporting that migration. And I have been informed," another brief glance toward Craig, "at considerable length over the last 12 hours, that the production environment is secured in a manner that requires your specific credentials and your institutional knowledge of the system to restore. That's correct, I said. What would it take, Lawrence said, to make this right? I had thought about that question. Not in anger and not in satisfaction, I had thought about it the same way I approached every infrastructure problem that mattered. Methodically, without ego, beginning with what was non-negotiable and building outward from there. Adrian set a folder on the table. The conditions inside that folder were not a revenge fantasy. They were not excessive. They were the terms that a reasonable person with 4 years of documented contributions, a legitimate legal claim, and a very clear picture of exactly how much leverage she was holding would put in writing and mean every word of. First, written confirmation from the company that the Sunday termination was null and void, with no gap in employment reflected on any official record, internal or external. Second, a formal, binding revision to the weekend emergency work protocol, requiring proper insurance authorization and advance written documentation before any employee could be directed to work outside their authorized coverage window. Third, a written acknowledgement, on company letterhead, signed by Lawrence Whitfield, that my written recommendations on the Paxton migration timeline had been disregarded without consultation, and that this decision had materially contributed to the delay the client was now experiencing. Fourth, a direct meeting within 30 days with Lawrence Whitfield, not Craig, to formally review my role, my compensation, and my trajectory at Ardent Solutions going forward. Lawrence read through the folder without rushing. He asked Adrian 2 questions. She answered both without hesitation. Then Lawrence looked at Craig. I have thought about what passed between them in that moment more than once since then. I watched Craig's jaw tighten and then go slack. Watched him look at the table for what felt like a very long time. Watched him process, in real time, the full structure of the situation he had constructed, decision by decision, shortcut by shortcut, dismissal by dismissal, and finally, fully understand the weight of what was standing over him. We accept these terms, Lawrence said. The Paxton migration went live the following Wednesday. I came back in on Tuesday morning, ran the authentication restoration sequence, reviewed the error logs from everything the contractors had attempted on Sunday, identified 2 data routing issues their override attempt had introduced into the staging layer that would have caused cascading failures if left unaddressed, corrected both of them, and had the full system clean, stable, and ready for Wednesday go-live by late afternoon. Felix brought me coffee. He leaned against my desk while I ran the final diagnostic pass and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "When Craig called me Sunday and told me you'd been fired, I thought he was bluffing." "He wasn't," I said. "No," Felix shook his head slowly. "He really wasn't." He was quiet again for a beat. You know what the strangest part of that whole Sunday was? He kept telling people the system had gone down, like it was a power outage, like it was a weather event. He genuinely couldn't explain what had happened or why, not to Lawrence, not to Garrett, not to the Paxton account manager who called 3 times demanding answers. He looked at me. "Does that bother you? That he still doesn't understand what you actually built?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "It used to," I said. "Now it mostly just confirms what I already knew going into that conference room." Hallie stopped by later that same afternoon. She didn't say much. She just set a card on my desk, the kind you get from the drugstore, with nothing printed inside, and inside it she had written in her neat handwriting, "We needed you to come back. Thank you for making them ask properly." I kept that card. The meeting with Lawrence happened exactly 26 days later. I walked in alone, Adrian available by phone, but not in the room. Lawrence offered me a salary increase of 22%, a formal title change to Senior Director of Infrastructure Systems, and a revised reporting structure that removed Craig Holloway from my direct chain of command entirely. He told me, with a directness I respected then and respect now, that Craig's role at Ardent was being restructured. That is the corporate vocabulary for a specific kind of consequence, one that doesn't reach termination, but removes a person's ability to cause the same category of damage they caused before. I don't know exactly what that looked like on Craig's end. That wasn't my business anymore. What was my business was the work in front of me, and the team I had come back to, and the systems I had built that were now going to be maintained and recognized the way they should have been from the beginning. I accepted Lawrence's offer. Not because I needed the validation, though I will not pretend the number didn't matter. I accepted it because the work was mine, built with my hands and my knowledge and my 4 years of quiet investment in something that I genuinely cared about making excellent. And because sometimes the most powerful move available to you is the one that looks, on the surface, like simply going back. There is something I have wanted to say about all of this since the day it happened, and I've been waiting until I could say it without the heat of the moment getting in the way. There will be people in your career, in your professional life, maybe in your life right now, who look at your competence and see a threat instead of an asset, who look at your boundaries and hear defiance instead of integrity, who have spent so long equating authority with power that they genuinely believe the two things are the same, and who, when confronted with someone who knows the difference, react the only way they know how. Craig fired me because he thought he could, because he had spent 18 months in a position of authority and mistaken that position for something it was not. He had never taken the time to understand what I had built, what it took to maintain it, or what the actual cost would be if I were gone. He had seen a woman who would not bend on a Sunday morning and made the decision to make an example of her. What he made instead was a case. My father used to say something I have carried into every room I have ever worked in. He said, "The best leverage is work they can't replicate and records they can't dispute." I kept records. I did work that was genuinely, demonstrably irreplaceable. And when the moment came, when Craig reached for what he thought was the nuclear option, certain he held all the cards, I found out that what I had built quietly over 4 years was something far more durable than anything he could dismantle in a single phone call before sunrise on a Sunday. Not every story ends this way. I know that. Some people hold their ground and pay a price that doesn't come back to them, and that reality is real and it deserves to be said. But this one did come back, because the foundation was solid, because the documentation was there, because I had been building, without anyone's permission or applause, something that could not be taken by the kind of person who never bothered to understand it. Sunday mornings are mine. The work is mine. And every system I have designed since carries my name in ways that cannot be undone by a phone call from a man who finally learned, too late, that there is a difference between being the boss and being irreplaceable. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Genuinely, you know what it takes to build something worth protecting, and this channel is exactly that. We are working toward 5,000 subscribers, and we are so close to making that happen. If Gemma's story meant something to you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. And if you have a story of your own, the kind where you held your ground when everything was on the line, drop it in the comments.